March 7, 1945, Remagen, Germany. The morning mist hung over the Rhine River as American tanks from the 9th Armored Division approached the ancient industrial town. Soldiers clutched photographs from home in their breast pockets, while radio operators adjusted their frequencies to coordinate the advance. German engineers had spent weeks preparing the Ludendorff Bridge for demolition, confident that no Allied force would cross the Rhine intact. Yet, as the first Sherman tanks crested the hill overlooking the river, the massive steel structure still stood, its twin towers defiant against the gray sky. Wehrmacht commanders had calculated that destroying the bridges would buy them months to reorganize their crumbling defenses. But the Americans were already racing toward the span, and the explosives rigged beneath its deck would fail at the crucial moment. This single bridge, built in 1918 and named after a World War I general, would become the gateway that sealed Nazi Germany's fate. The story that unfolded over the next 72 hours would demonstrate how industrial might, logistical superiority, and split-second decisions could collapse an empire. By January 1945, the German Wehrmacht existed more in Hitler's imagination than on the battlefield. Staff officers in the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht headquarters in Berlin studied maps showing phantom divisions that had been destroyed months earlier. General Alfred Jodel's daily situation reports painted an increasingly desperate picture. The Eastern Front had collapsed following the Red Army's Vistula-Oder offensive, while in the West, Allied forces had recovered from the temporary setback of the Battle of the Bulge. The statistics were staggering. Germany had lost over 1.2 million soldiers in 1944 alone. Tank production had plummeted from 169 units in July 1944 to just 385 in January 1945, while American factories were producing over 2,000 tanks monthly. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of European skies, could manage only 300 operational aircraft compared to the Allies. 14,000 planes on the Western Front. A German staff officer in Army Group B headquarters near Düsseldorf reviewed the grim intelligence reports each morning. Fuel shortages had reduced tank training to a few hours per month. New recruits, many barely 16 years old, received abbreviated training with inadequate equipment. The Atlantic Wall had been stripped of its best units to feed the Eastern Front's insatiable appetite for replacements. Field Marshal Walter Model, commanding Army Group B, understood the mathematics of defeat better than most. His forces defending the Rhine numbered approximately 85,000 men, less than a single full-strength Army corps. Against them, the Allies massed over 1.5 million troops with unlimited supplies flowing through the rebuilt French ports. Model's ammunition allocations allowed for just 3 days of intensive combat. Yet German defensive doctrine still called for holding river lines at all costs. The Rhine represented Germany's last natural barrier before the industrial Ruhr Valley. Wehrmacht engineers had spent months preparing demolition charges on every bridge spanning the mighty river. Their orders were explicit. No bridge should fall into Allied hands intact. The irony was palpable. Germany, which had conquered most of Europe through rapid mechanized advances, now found itself desperately trying to destroy infrastructure to slow an enemy whose industrial capacity dwarfed their own. American logistics officers calculated they could replace destroyed bridges within weeks using prefabricated materials. The question wasn't whether the Allies would cross the Rhine, but when and how many German lives would be lost in futile resistance. The Rhine River had protected Germanic tribes since Roman times. In March 1945, it remained Germany's most formidable defensive position, a water barrier averaging 400 meters wide, with swift currents and steep banks. German military planners considered it impassable without extensive preparation and massive casualties. Wehrmacht defensive preparations along the Rhine followed standard doctrine established during the Great War. Engineers installed observation posts in church towers and factory smokestacks, providing commanding views of potential crossing sites. Anti-tank guns, camouflaged in concrete bunkers, covered approach routes to bridge sites. The few remaining panzer units positioned themselves as mobile reserves, ready to counterattack any Allied bridgehead. A Wehrmacht engineer inspecting the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen in early March found the demolition preparations complete. Shape charges had been placed at critical structural points with both primary and secondary firing systems. The bridge's massive stone towers, built to withstand artillery bombardment, contained command posts equipped with direct telephone lines to higher headquarters. Everything appeared ready for the bridge's destruction. Allied intelligence officers studying aerial reconnaissance photographs counted 17 major bridges, spanning the Rhine between Switzerland and the Netherlands. Each represented a potential crossing point, but all showed evidence of German demolition preparations. The Americans planned to force multiple crossings simultaneously, overwhelming German reserves and preventing effective counterattacks. The strategic calculations seemed clear to both sides. General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group would require at least 2 weeks to establish a major bridgehead using assault boats and temporary bridges. German defenders could use that time to organize counterattacks and establish new defensive lines further east. Both armies understood the mathematics of river crossings, historically among the most costly military operations. What the Germans failed to appreciate was the sheer scale of Allied material superiority. American engineers possessed enough bridging equipment to span the Rhine at multiple points within days. Allied air forces could guarantee air superiority during vulnerable crossing operations. Most critically, American artillery could deliver overwhelming firepower to suppress German defensive positions. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, overall commander of German forces in the West, requested additional reserves to defend the Rhine line. Hitler's response revealed the Reich's desperate situation. No significant reserves existed. The Führer ordered existing units to fight to the last man and the last cartridge. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test German defensive doctrine against Allied industrial might. Neither side anticipated that the outcome would be decided not by careful planning or heroic resistance, but by a moment of confusion and failed. Explosives on a single bridge at Remagen, the American first. Armies advanced toward the Rhine in early March 1945, resembled a mechanized avalanche more than traditional military operations. General Courtney Hodges commanded forces that epitomized American industrial warfare, endless columns of Sherman tanks, self-propelled artillery, and supply trucks stretching beyond the horizon. Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Engelmann of the 9th Armored Division's Combat Command B led the spearhead toward Remagen on March 7th. His force included the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, the 14th Tank Battalion, and attached engineers, approximately 200 men with 60 tanks and 30 armored vehicles. They advanced along roads clogged with German refugees fleeing westward, creating a surreal mixture of military might and human tragedy. The logistical miracle supporting this advance defied historical precedent. American supply lines stretched back through France to ports handling 26,000 tons of supplies daily. The Red Ball Express truck convoy system delivered ammunition, fuel, and rations with clockwork precision. Each American division consumed 650 tons of supplies daily, more than an entire German Army Corps received in a week. A tank. Mechanic with the 14th Tank Battalion described the stark contrasts he witnessed. American tanks rarely broke down due to superior maintenance and abundant spare parts. When mechanical failures occurred, replacement tanks arrived within hours from depot stocks. Meanwhile, abandoned German vehicles littered roadsides, not destroyed by combat, but immobilized by lack of fuel or spare parts. The human dimension of this industrial superiority was equally striking. American soldiers carried individual first aid kits, water purification tablets, and K-rations that provided 3,000 calories daily. Medical evacuation helicopters, a revolutionary innovation, could transport wounded soldiers from front lines to surgical hospitals within 30 minutes. German wounded often waited days for medical attention. Radio communication exemplified the technological gap. Every American platoon possessed multiple radio sets enabling instant coordination. Tank commanders communicated directly with artillery observers and air support controllers. German units increasingly relied on motorcycle messengers and landline telephones vulnerable to artillery fire. The weather favored the American advance. Clear skies allowed P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers to provide continuous close air support. German positions identified by forward observers faced destruction within minutes. The Luftwaffe's absence was so complete that Allied aircraft operated without fighter escort in broad daylight. As Combat Command B approached Remagen, German resistance appeared sporadic and disorganized. Small groups of soldiers surrendered after token resistance, many expressing relief that their war was ending. The Wehrmacht's defensive doctrine assumed mobile reserves could counterattack Allied penetrations. But reserves that existed only on paper could not influence battlefield reality. At 1:15 p.m. on March 7, 1945, Sergeant Alexander Drabik of the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion became the first American soldier to set eyes on the intact Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen. His incredulous radio report to Lieutenant Colonel Engelmann changed the course of military history. "The bridge is still up. The bridge is still up!" The tactical situation seemed impossible. German doctrine required bridge demolition before enemy forces came within artillery range. Intelligence reports had predicted that all Rhine bridges would be destroyed days before Allied arrival. Yet here stood a major crossing point, its steel superstructure gleaming in the afternoon sunlight, guarded by perhaps 50 German soldiers. Engelmann faced an instant decision that would affect millions of lives. His orders called for establishing defensive positions west of the Rhine and awaiting further instructions. Seizing the bridge meant exceeding his authority and risking his entire command. But military history offered few opportunities to capture intact strategic objectives of such magnitude. German anti-aircraft gun positioned near the bridge's western approach fired ineffectively at approaching American tanks. The crew appeared more concerned with escape than defense. Wehrmacht defensive plans called for coordinated resistance by multiple companies with interlocking fields of fire. Instead, individual soldiers abandoned positions after minimal resistance. The bridge itself bore evidence of hasty demolition preparations. Explosive charges were visible on the main spans, connected by cables leading to firing positions in the eastern tower. German engineers had followed standard procedures for bridge demolition, except that time had run out before implementation. The rapid American advance had compressed their carefully planned timeline from days to hours. Captain Willy Bracci commanded the bridge's German defenders, a mixed unit of engineers, anti-aircraft personnel, and Volkssturm militia. His force lacked the heavy weapons and trained infantry necessary for effective defense. Radio communications with higher headquarters had been severed by Allied bombing. Bracci faced the nightmare scenario of independent command without adequate resources or clear instructions. American tank crews observed German soldiers running eastward across the bridge, apparently abandoning their positions. The Wehrmacht's fighting spirit, legendary throughout the war, appeared broken by years of defeats and overwhelming Allied superiority. What had once been Europe's most formidable military machine now resembled a refugee column more than an army. The moment of decision was approaching. In minutes, Engelmann would either follow conservative military doctrine or seize an opportunity that might end the war weeks earlier. At 1:50 p.m., Lieutenant Colonel Engelmann ordered the attack. Sherman tanks from the 14th Tank Battalion began crossing the Ludendorff Bridge, while German engineers frantically attempted to detonate their demolition charges. The explosives fired, sending tremors through the massive structure. But the bridge held, damaged but passable. Sergeant Drabik led the 1st Infantry Squad across the span, followed by Lieutenant Karl Timmermann platoon. German machine gun fire from the eastern towers caused several casualties, but American soldiers pressed forward. The psychological impact of crossing Germany's last natural barrier proved as devastating to German morale as the tactical breakthrough. A.K. Wehrmacht engineer in the eastern tower described the moment of realization that their demolition had failed. Primary firing circuits had been severed by American artillery. Secondary charges detonated but lacked sufficient power to collapse the main spans. Years of careful preparation had failed in the crucial moment when improvisation replaced systematic execution. Captain Bradge attempted to organize counterattacks with his remaining forces, but the mathematics of combat worked against him. American tanks crossing the bridge could engage German positions with direct fire, while infantry cleared defensive positions room by room. German defenders lacked anti-tank weapons capable of stopping Sherman tanks at close range. The speed of American exploitation demonstrated superior tactical doctrine and training. Within 30 minutes, Combat Command B had established a bridgehead 1,000 meters deep on the eastern bank. Radio communications brought immediate reinforcement requests that would be answered within hours. German doctrine assumed bridge demolition would prevent such rapid consolidation. Medical corpsmen established casualty collection points on both sides of the bridge, treating wounded soldiers with morphine and plasma, medical resources unavailable to German forces. The contrast extended beyond battlefield care to strategic medical planning. American forces possessed enough medical supplies to treat thousands of casualties. German medical services had been reduced to basic wound dressing and prayer. Allied air support arrived overhead within 45 minutes of the initial crossing. P-47 fighters strafed German positions while medium bombers struck suspected reserve assembly areas. The Luftwaffe's response consisted of 4 Messerschmitt fighters that appeared briefly before being driven off by overwhelming Allied air superiority. By 3:00 p.m., American forces controlled both ends of the Ludendorff Bridge and had expanded their bridgehead to include the town of Erpel. German counterattacks consisted of small groups of soldiers armed with Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons, brave but futile, gestures against an enemy with unlimited resources and absolute tactical mobility. The impossible had become reality. American forces had established the first Allied bridgehead across the Rhine through a combination of tactical boldness and German defensive failures. News of Remagen's fall reached Adolf Hitler in his Berlin bunker at 4:30 p.m. on March 7th. The Führer's rage was immediate and predictable. He ordered the bridge's recapture at all costs and began seeking scapegoats for the disaster. 4 officers would eventually face execution for their alleged failures. At Remagen, Field Marshal Kesselring, recently transferred from Italy to command Army Group West, received impossible orders: destroy the bridge and eliminate the American bridgehead within 24 hours. His available reserves consisted of 2 under-strength divisions already committed to other sectors. The Wehrmacht's strategic reserve had been consumed in futile counterattacks. During the Ardennes offensive, a German staff officer at Army Group B headquarters calculated the forces required to recapture Remagen. Standard doctrine called for attacking enemy bridgeheads with 3-to-1 superiority in infantry and armor. Against American forces with unlimited supplies and air support, even greater margins would be necessary. Such forces simply did not exist in March 1945. General von Zangen's 15th Army received orders to organize immediate counterattacks against the American bridgehead. His forces included the 11th Panzer Division, reduced to 12 operational tanks, and various Volkssturm units with minimal training and obsolete weapons. The contrast with American reinforcements streaming across the bridge was stark and demoralizing. German commanders understood that Remagen represented more than tactical defeat. It symbolized the collapse of their entire defensive strategy. The Rhine barrier had been Germany's last hope for prolonging the war through defensive operations. With American forces established on the eastern bank, no natural obstacles remained between Allied armies and Berlin. The Luftwaffe's response to Remagen demonstrated the Air Force's complete impotence. Approximately 200 aircraft, the largest German air operation in months, attacked the bridge over 3 days. Most planes were shot down by Allied fighters or anti-aircraft guns. The few bombs that hit the target caused minimal damage to the massive stone structure. More ominously for Germany, the Remagen crossing prompted Allied commanders to accelerate their Rhine offensive. General Montgomery's 21st Army Group and General Patton's Third Army both advanced their crossing schedules. What should have been Germany's strongest defensive line was collapsing along its entire length. Wehrmacht communications intercepted by Allied intelligence revealed the psychological impact of Remagen's fall. Unit commanders reported mass desertions and surrender rates approaching 30% in some sectors. German soldiers increasingly viewed continued resistance as pointless sacrifice rather than patriotic duty. The industrial war had reached its logical conclusion. Germany's remaining military forces could no longer influence strategic outcomes through tactical excellence. American material superiority had achieved a level where German resistance, however heroic, merely delayed inevitable defeat by days rather than weeks. Within 24 hours of the initial crossing, the American bridgehead at Remagen had expanded to encompass 15 square kilometers of German territory. The 9th Infantry Division reinforced the original force, bringing the American presence to over 8,000 troops with 200 armored vehicles. German counterattacks had failed to materialize in strength sufficient to threaten the expanding perimeter. American engineers worked systematically to strengthen their position. Pontoon bridges supplemented the damaged Ludendorff Bridge, providing redundant crossing capability. Bulldozers carved supply routes through the hilly terrain east of the Rhine. Within 48 hours, supply trucks were delivering ammunition and rations directly to forward positions, a logistical achievement that would have required weeks for German forces to accomplish. A Wehrmacht intelligence officer analyzing American bridgehead expansion noted the systematic nature of their operations. Each day brought measurable progress in fortification, supply buildup, and force concentration. German doctrine emphasized immediate counterattacks before enemy bridgeheads could be consolidated. The window for effective counteraction had already closed. The German 11th Panzer Division finally launched its counterattack on March 9th, spearheaded by 8 Tiger II tanks, among the most formidable armored vehicles ever built. American defenders met this assault with concentrated artillery fire coordinated by forward observers. Within 2 hours, 6 Tigers lay burning in German-held territory, their crews killed or captured. The technological contrast was revealing. German Tiger tanks possessed superior armor and firepower compared to American Shermans. But American forces compensated through superior numbers, logistics, and tactical coordination. When Tigers broke down, a frequent occurrence due to mechanical complexity, no spare parts or recovery vehicles were available. Disabled American tanks were repaired or replaced within hours. Medical statistics from the bridgehead demonstrated American logistical superiority in human terms. Wounded American soldiers received morphine within minutes and reached surgical hospitals within 2 hours. German casualties often lay in field positions for days without medical attention. The contrast affected morale as much as battlefield effectiveness. Allied air superiority over the bridgehead was absolute. P-47 and P-51 fighters maintained continuous combat air patrols while medium bombers struck German assembly areas. Luftwaffe attempts at ground attack resulted in heavy losses for negligible damage. German soldiers learned to recognize aircraft engine sounds and sought cover whenever planes approached, regardless of nationality. By March 12th, American forces controlled a bridgehead 20 kilometers wide and 8 kilometers deep. 3 full divisions had crossed the Rhine with complete artillery support and unlimited supplies. German counterattacks had been reduced to company-level operations by isolated units acting without coordination or adequate support. The strategic implications were becoming apparent to German commanders. American forces could now attack northward toward the Ruhr industrial region or eastward toward central Germany. No significant German reserves remained to oppose either advance. The fall of Remagen triggered a cascade of strategic disasters throughout German-held territory. Field Marshal Model's Army Group B, responsible for defending the Ruhr Valley, found itself outflanked by American forces expanding their bridgehead. The Wehrmacht's carefully planned defensive positions west of the Rhine had become irrelevant overnight. General Eisenhower recognized Remagen's strategic potential within hours of receiving initial reports. Allied forces that had been preparing for costly river assault operations could now exploit a ready-made crossing point. The Supreme Commander ordered maximum priority for reinforcing and expanding the Remagen bridgehead, diverting resources from other operations, a German logistics officer reviewing supply requirements for counterattacking. Remagen calculated that his forces would need 500 tons of ammunition daily to maintain effective resistance. Available supply capacity totaled less than 50 tons per day, and that assuming undamaged transportation networks. Allied air attacks had reduced German logistical capacity to a fraction of wartime requirements. The psychological impact on German civilians was equally devastating. Radio broadcasts attempted to minimize the Remagen disaster, but refugees streaming eastward told different stories. The Rhine had been Germany's last hope for organized resistance. Its breach meant Allied armies would soon reach every major German city. Wehrmacht communications intercepted by Allied intelligence revealed the extent of German disintegration. Unit commanders reported equipment shortages that rendered further resistance impossible. A tank battalion reported possessing 3 operational vehicles. An artillery regiment had ammunition for 30 minutes of combat. Infantry companies mustered fewer than 50 soldiers each. German industrial production, still functioning despite bombing campaigns, could not influence battlefield outcomes due to transportation failures. Factories produced weapons that never reached frontline units. The Ruhr Valley's steel mills operated at full capacity while German soldiers fought with captured Allied weapons due to supply system collapse. The Reich's last military reserves were committed piecemeal to contain the Remagen bridgehead. Hitler's orders demanded immediate counterattacks regardless of preparation or coordination. German commanders found themselves sacrificing their final effective units in futile attempts to restore an impossible situation. Allied intelligence estimated that German forces opposing the bridgehead had lost 70% of their combat effectiveness within 1 week of the initial crossing. Casualty rates, equipment losses, and desertion had reduced effective German strength to levels incapable of sustained resistance. The mathematics of attrition warfare had reached their logical conclusion. American forces now possessed strategic mobility that German defenders could not match. Reinforcements arrived continuously while German reserves had been exhausted. The industrial war had achieved its ultimate expression: unlimited American resources overwhelming finite German resistance through simple mathematics of material superiority. The question was no longer whether Germany would lose the war, but how many additional casualties would result before inevitable surrender. The expansion of the Remagen bridgehead set in motion Operation Lumberjack, the Allied drive to encircle the Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heartland. American forces streaming across the Rhine could now attack northward to link with British forces, trapping Army Group B in a massive pocket containing over 300,000 German troops. General Bradley's 12th Army Group exploited the Remagen crossing with methodical precision. The 1st and 9th Armies advanced along diverging axes designed to envelop German forces before they could establish new defensive lines. American tactical mobility, supported by unlimited fuel and spare parts, allowed rapid movement that German commanders could not match or anticipate. A German supply officer attached to the Lespet Corps calculated his unit's remaining combat capability. Fuel stocks permitted 3 days of mobile operations. Ammunition supplies would last 1 week under normal consumption rates. Medical supplies had been exhausted during the initial fighting around Remagen. The mathematics of logistics predicted German collapse within days, regardless of tactical considerations. Field Marshal Model recognized the strategic disaster developing around his forces. Army Group B controlled Germany's most important industrial region, but industrial capacity meant nothing without transportation networks to deliver finished products. Allied air attacks had severed rail lines and destroyed bridges. Throughout the Ruhr, factories continued operating while their products accumulated uselessly in bombed warehouses. The human cost of the Ruhr encirclement was staggering. Over 325,000 German soldiers would eventually surrender, more prisoners than the Soviet Union captured at Stalingrad. These troops included some of Germany's most experienced units, veterans of campaigns across Europe who now faced surrender or death in hopeless defensive positions. American forces demonstrated the industrial democracy's capacity for sustained offensive operations. The 1st Armored Division advanced 57 kilometers in 48 hours, maintaining combat effectiveness through superior logistics and maintenance. German panzer divisions, once the Wehrmacht's elite forces, could barely manage 10 kilometers daily due to mechanical breakdowns and fuel shortages. Allied air superiority over the Ruhr was so complete that transport aircraft operated in broad daylight, resupplying forward units by parachute. German soldiers watched helplessly as American forces received reinforcements and supplies that their own units had not seen for months. The psychological impact was as devastating as the material consequences. The Ruhr's civilian population, approximately 4.5 million people, found themselves trapped between advancing Allied armies and retreating German forces. Food distribution systems had collapsed under bombing attacks. Public utilities functioned sporadically. The region that had powered Nazi Germany's war machine was becoming a humanitarian disaster. German resistance in the Ruhr pocket would continue for 3 weeks, but the outcome was predetermined by mathematics rather than military skill. American forces possessed unlimited ammunition while German stocks dwindled daily. Allied casualties could be replaced immediately while German losses were irreplaceable. Industrial warfare had reached its logical conclusion. Unlimited resources overwhelming finite resistance through simple attrition. The Wehrmacht's defensive doctrine assumed mobile operations and strategic reserves. With both impossible, German forces could only delay inevitable defeat through individual heroism that changed nothing. With the Ruhr Valley encircled and German reserves exhausted, American armored spearheads raced eastward across central Germany with unprecedented speed. The 2nd Armored Division advanced 95 kilometers in a single day on April 11, 1945, a rate of advance that matched the German blitzkrieg campaigns of 1940-41. But in reverse, General Patton's Third Army, having crossed the Rhine at multiple points south of Remagen, drove toward Bavaria and Austria. His forces encountered token resistance from scattered German units lacking fuel, ammunition, and communication with higher headquarters. The Wehrmacht's defensive strategy had collapsed completely. Individual commanders made tactical decisions based on rumor and speculation rather than intelligence or orders. A tank commander with the 3rd Armored Division described the surreal nature of the advance across Germany. American columns passed through towns where white flags hung from every window. German soldiers surrendered in groups of hundreds, often without firing a shot. The contrast with earlier fighting in Normandy and the Ardennes was stark. Resistance had evaporated as completely as morning mist. The logistical miracle supporting this advance defied historical precedent. American supply lines stretched 800 kilometers from French ports to advancing spearheads, yet shortages never developed. Fuel trucks, ammunition convoys, and medical evacuation vehicles maintained steady flows despite the rapid advance. German observers noted that American forces seemed to carry their entire industrial base with them. Liberated concentration camps revealed the true nature of Nazi Germany to advancing American soldiers. The horrors discovered at Buchenwald, Dachau, and smaller camps transformed the war's meaning for troops who had previously viewed their enemies as fellow soldiers fighting for their country. The systematic extermination apparatus shocked veterans hardened by years of combat. German civilian refugees fleeing westward clogged roads intended for military traffic, creating massive humanitarian problems. An estimated 12 million Germans were displaced by April 1945, more than the entire pre-war population of many European countries. The collapse of civil authority meant no organized evacuation or relief efforts existed. Soviet forces advancing from the east created a race for German territory between Allied armies. American units pushed toward the Elbe River while Soviet spearheads drove for Berlin. The meeting of these forces would effectively cut Germany in half and eliminate any possibility of continued organized resistance. Wehrmacht units, caught between advancing Allied and Soviet armies, faced impossible choices. Surrender to the Americans meant prisoner of war camps and eventual repatriation. Capture by Soviet forces often meant death or decades in labor camps. Many German commanders chose to move their units westward, hoping to surrender to Western allies rather than face Soviet justice. The Third Reich's territorial control shrank daily as Allied armies advanced from multiple directions. German-held territory resembled islands of resistance surrounded by overwhelming Allied forces. Communication between isolated German units became impossible as Allied air attacks severed telephone lines and radio transmissions were intercepted or jammed. On April 25, 1945, American and Soviet forces met at Torgau on the Elbe River, effectively cutting Nazi Germany in half. The Reich that had once controlled territory from the Atlantic Ocean to the Volga River was reduced to isolated pockets of resistance that could no longer influence strategic outcomes. The German High Command's final situation reports painted a picture of complete military collapse. Army Group Center, defending Czechoslovakia, reported effective combat strength of less than 15%. Army Group South in Austria possessed fuel for 2 days of operations. The Wehrmacht's order of battle existed primarily on paper, unit designations without corresponding combat capability. Adolf Hitler's suicide on April 30th removed the last obstacle to German surrender negotiations. Grand Admiral Dönitz, Hitler's designated successor, understood that continued resistance meant pointless casualties without strategic purpose. The Reich's remaining military forces lacked ammunition, fuel, and communication necessary for coordinated operations. A Wehrmacht signals officer described the breakdown of German command structure in the war's final weeks. Radio communications between headquarters units had been severed by Allied bombing and artillery fire. Motorcycle messengers could not traverse Allied-controlled territory. German commanders made tactical decisions in complete isolation, unaware of developments beyond their immediate vicinity. Allied intelligence estimated that German military production had fallen to 5% of peak wartime levels by April 1945. Factories that had produced 1,200 tanks monthly in 1943 were manufacturing fewer than 50 vehicles by war's end. The industrial base that had sustained 6 years of global warfare could no longer equip a single army corps adequately. The surrender process revealed the extent of German military disintegration. Over 2.8 million Wehrmacht personnel surrendered to Western Allied forces in the war's final month, more prisoners than had been captured during the entire North African campaign. Many German units had simply abandoned their positions and sought Allied forces to arrange formal surrender. Civilian casualties during Germany's final collapse exceeded military losses by significant margins. Allied bombing campaigns, artillery bombardments, and the chaos of military retreat created humanitarian disasters throughout German territory. An estimated 600,000 German civilians died during the war's final 4 months, a death toll exceeding many earlier military campaigns. The industrial statistics that had driven Nazi Germany's early victories now documented its complete defeat. German steel production in April 1945 totaled less than 100,000 tons compared to peak monthly production of 2.3 million tons in 1943. Coal mining had virtually ceased due to transportation disruption and labor shortages. The economic foundation of modern warfare had simply disappeared. On May 8, 1945, German military leaders signed unconditional surrender documents in Berlin and Rhine, officially ending the European War. The Third Reich, that had promised to last 1,000 years, had survived 12 years and 4 months. The industrial democracy had proven more durable than totalitarian efficiency when tested by total war's ultimate mathematics. The Capture of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen shortened World War II in Europe by an estimated 3 to 6 weeks, saving thousands of Allied lives and preventing additional destruction of German cities and infrastructure. Military historians consider it among the most strategically significant tactical actions of the entire war. The bridge itself became a symbol of American industrial and logistical superiority over Nazi Germany. Within 10 days of its capture, Allied forces had transported over 125,000 troops and 25,000 vehicles across the Rhine using Remagen and supplementary pontoon bridges. This rate of force projection exceeded anything achieved during the Normandy landings, demonstrating how American military capabilities had evolved throughout the war. German post-war military analysis concluded that Remagen's fall made continued resistance strategically pointless. The Wehrmacht's defensive doctrine required natural barriers like the Rhine to channel Allied attacks into prepared killing zones. Once American forces established unrestricted access to central Germany, no defensive positions could be held long enough to influence war outcomes. The human cost of Germany's final collapse was staggering. An estimated 1.8 million German military personnel died during the war's final 6 months, more casualties than the entire African and Italian campaigns combined. Many of these deaths resulted directly from Hitler's refusal to surrender after military defeat became inevitable at Remagen. American casualty rates during the final advance across Germany were historically low, reflecting the collapse of organized German resistance. The 1st Infantry Division, which had suffered heavy losses during the Normandy breakout and Battle of the Bulge, advanced 400 kilometers in April 1945 while sustaining fewer than 200 casualties. The Remagen crossing demonstrated democracy's capacity for rapid strategic adaptation. American commanders at multiple levels made independent decisions that accelerated victory when opportunities arose. German military culture, emphasizing obedience and centralized control, could not respond effectively to rapidly changing battlefield conditions. The bridge that changed history stood for only 10 more days after its capture before structural damage caused its collapse into the Rhine. But those 10 days had sealed Nazi Germany's fate and demonstrated the decisive power of industrial democracy in total war. Today, visitors to Remagen find a peaceful town on the Rhine where tourists photograph the bridge towers that remain standing as war memorials. The Ludendorff Bridge's capture has become a case study taught in military academies worldwide, demonstrating how tactical boldness and strategic flexibility can achieve decisive results when supported by overwhelming material superiority. The Peace Museum of Remagen, housed in one of the original bridge towers, displays artifacts from the battle, American uniforms, German defensive equipment, and photographs documenting those crucial days in March 1945. Veterans' accounts, recorded in the museum's Oral History Project, emphasize the surreal nature of crossing Germany's last natural barrier against such feeble resistance. Statistical analysis of the Remagen operation reveals the mathematical foundations of American victory. In World War II, the 9th Armored Division that captured the bridge had been equipped entirely with American-manufactured weapons, vehicles, and supplies. Their tactical success reflected strategic decisions made years earlier in Detroit factories and Pittsburgh steel mills. German military memoirs consistently identify Remagen as the moment when continued resistance became pointless rather than patriotic. Field Marshal Model's suicide 3 weeks after the bridge's capture symbolized the Wehrmacht's recognition that military honor could not overcome industrial reality. The bridge's legacy extends beyond military history to questions of leadership, technology, and national will during total war. American success at Remagen resulted from systematic preparation, superior logistics, and tactical flexibility qualities that reflected democratic institutions and industrial capacity rather than individual heroism or military genius. The stone towers, standing sentinel over the Rhine, remind visitors that wars are ultimately decided by nations' capacity to produce, transport, and coordinate the materials of modern combat. The Ludendorff Bridge became a symbol of democracy's triumph over tyranny through the methodical application of industrial might, guided by strategic intelligence and tactical courage. In the end, Remagen proved that freedom's cause, when supported by adequate resources and competent leadership, could overcome any totalitarian challenge. What is your perspective on this part of history? Share your thoughts in the comments, because every memory and reflection helps keep the past alive.